We continue with Chapter 5, the section entitled Setting versus Mapping that begins on page 96. Now, in this section, we talk about the differences between mapping an aesthetic property to a variable, which is generally what we've done so far, or just setting it to a single value by specifying that in the layer, in the parameters. That is, we can map an aesthetic to a variable like this, where we map in the aesthetic layer, where we map the cut variable to color, so you have different colors for cut, or you can set it to a constant, just say, for example, color equals red. So the notion is, if you want the appearance, for example, color, to correspond to values, usually discrete values, of a variable, like categories of a variable, you put the specification of color inside the AES function. On the other hand, if you want to override the default size or color, you specify the value outside of the AES function to set it. So these two plots that we'll look at next have similar code, but they have different outputs. The second plot maps it to the variable dark blue, and the first plot sets it to the variable dark blue directly. Okay, so in the first variable, note we're doing it outside of AES. We're saying I want color to be dark blue. And all of the points, because it was in geom point, are dark blue. In the second variable, though, we are mapping the color as dark blue, but what it does, it scales that to a color scale, and because the value is discrete, you end up with pink. The default color scale uses evenly spaced colors on the color wheel. It doesn't set it to dark blue. It uses this color scale. That's what mapping to the aesthetic does. It scales it using this color wheel, and you end up with this pinkish color, which is not what you want at all. Okay, so again, this is kind of a nonsensical plot. It tells us that actually this color is meant to be dark blue, but it makes more sense just to map it directly to dark blue, to set it directly to dark blue using this first plot, like that. Now, a third approach is to map the value, but to override the default scale. Okay, so when you map the value in AES, it scales it, which is why we ended up with that pink color instead of the blue color. It scaled it on a color wheel. But here we can override that. Scale color identity will use the exact specification that you're asking for. So this is very similar to setting it. And you end up with the first plot again, where all of them are dark blue. Now, sometimes you might want to map aesthetics to constants. And for example, if you want to display multiple layers with varying parameters, you can name each layer. So note what we're doing here. We're just mapping displacement. We're creating scatter plot of displacement, engine displacement, and highway mileage on the Y variable, engine displacement on the X. We're mapping it with points, and we're drawing two geom smooth lines. You can do that. Each one is a separate layer. In the first, we're saying, I want the color of it to be a low-S smooth. Low-S is a particular type of smooth. And in the second one, we're saying, I want the color to be a LM smooth. LM is a straight line. It's a regression line. And down here, we're saying in the labels, I want the color to be tied to the method. Low-S is one method, LM is another method. So what will happen is it'll plot, we'll take a look, it will plot displacement by highway. It will draw in this first layer that we've added, it will draw a low-S line, the curvy line, and in the second layer of geom smooth that we've added, it will draw an LM, which is a straight line, the red line, and color is method. So we get two colors associated with the LM method and with the low S method, so we can see which line is which.